His manner of writing is educated, but his subject matter is always mired in squalor. Better than food, man. On la conga le ligoti. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Cliff Sargent. Great to see you as always. Get that coffee. Delicious. From Colombia. Today is a classic of American literature. A smutty masterpiece of existentialist, artistic, expat, francophile, Parisian wanderlust called The Tropic of Cancer by the very American author, very New York, Brooklyn author, Henry Miller. Good old turkey sandwiches. That's an inside joke from my review of Henry Miller's Black Spring. Link below. Published originally in France in 1934 by Obelisk. And then banned all over the world. Which was sad. But you know, it made him famous, in a way. So The Tropic of Cancer. This, admittedly gorgeous edition, was a very kind gift from friend and patron Nuri. Thank you very much. And thank you for the very sweet note as well. I love it when you guys, if you buy me a book, when folks leave a little note. And the thing is, I would really appreciate if you guys wrote your email in there, actually, because I have no way of contacting you unless you're already a patron and I can find you that way, or you're on Instagram and we've spoken. I mean, it's actually, I've received multiple books where I can't thank the sender because I literally have no idea how to contact them. Maybe somebody could clue me in how to do this if you receive an Amazon gift, because I can't figure it out. But I hope they don't mind if I share. But Nuri wrote that when they're watching my videos, they feel like they're catching up with an old friend. That's a wonderful compliment, and I'm so glad to hear that. You are catching up with an old friend. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a one-sided conversation, but you know, doing what I can. And it's very appropriate for this book, you know, because reading Henry Miller is certainly like catching up with an old friend. The cadence and colloquial, autobiographical, confessional style immediately creates a kind of warm intimacy with tastefully crass jokes, you know, thrown in here and there for good measure, followed by sincere philosophical musings. It's one of the greatest American expat novels, right up there with The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway, which must have inspired it. As The Tropic of Cancer also features a protagonist who, you know, gambles about drinking and cavorting and getting into trouble and then writing about the experience, composing a novel of the experience. Henry Miller and Hemingway were actually a part of the same generation, the Lost Generation, right? It's so interesting because I never think about Miller in that generation, but closer to the Beat generation, whom he inspired. Probably because his books were banned for so long, in the States at least, that it took until, you know, the next generation of readers. I mean, they weren't published in the States legally until the 60s. So yeah, it really took till the next generation of readers for him to get famous, right? To get well known, to be widely read, legally, that is. That's my suspicion, at least. It's also interesting, I learned in this documentary I've linked below, the Henry Miller Odyssey, that he actually wanted to go to Spain originally, not France, but he wound up in France. And it took him a long time to get to Spain. Like 20 years or something. But speaking of the Lost Generation and Hemingway and other great authors, the executive producer and sponsor of today's video is Ageless Literature, rare booksellers based out of St. Petersburg, Florida. You gotta check them out. They've got a ton of great stuff, including a signed Hemingway. And as a matter of fact, they even have a first US edition of The Tropic of Cancer signed by Henry Miller himself. Miller even drew a little smoking cartoon of himself. Check it out, link below. And not only do they sell rare books, but they're also launching the first mobile app for book collectors to learn about rare books, purchase rare books, and share your collections in a way that's never been done before. They've also partnered with a bindery that has a database of 5 million out-of-print books that can be printed and bound in leather just for you. So if you're interested in curated collectible books and updates on this amazing new app they're launching, please head over to agelessliterature.com and subscribe to their newsletter. And if you pick anything up from their site, which I highly recommend you do, you can get 10% off your order with the code BETTERTHANFOOD. Link to their site below. Check them out. Full transparency, if you use the code BETTERTHANFOOD when checking out on their site, I do receive a commission, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Ageless Literature for supporting the show. All right, so what is The Tropic of Cancer after I've given you this whole spiel, right? The Tropic of Cancer is an autobiographical odyssey through the bowels of Paris. Much of what's inside the book happened, but of course much of it was probably exaggerated and jazzed up. But maybe not, I don't know. You'd have to ask him. Basically, it's the diary in novel form of a starving, horny American expat with a love of literature, having the adventure of his life. It's a stream of consciousness memoir featuring various sexual escapades, characters and travels, meals and ideas, portraits of cities, places, people, things, humorous situations, tragic situations, tragically humorous situations, and philosophical musings. Sometimes he gives prescriptions for life, like little statements of wisdom, almost like Zen koans or something. In fact, there's a paper I found after writing that entitled Zen Buddhism as Radical Conviviality in the Works of Henry Miller, Kenneth Rexroth, and Thomas Merton by Manuel Yang. Absolutely. Radically convivial is a perfect description of Miller, in my opinion. Link below for that paper. I thought it was very interesting. Henry Miller's relationship with Zen and Buddhism, right? And as the paper points out, as Yang points out, there's the ending of the book, the ending scene has a very Buddhist quality to it, which I didn't pick up the first time reading it, but I completely agree. But yeah, with Miller, his friendliness, while overwrought and seemingly insincere at first, his overexuberant friendliness is contagious. Miller is a clown. He said so himself. He's a lecherous thief. Even in the book, he pockets a bunch of money meant for this guy's crazy wife. And even in real life, in his writings, he had a list of the styles of various authors that he wanted to rip off for his own use, right? Miller is a living embodiment of the potential for success found in the phrase, fake it till you make it. Except within the faking it, within Miller trying to fake it, he discovered that he didn't have to fake it. He worked at it, he developed it, and then suddenly he had it in spades. So, another way to put this would be he found his own voice, right? Through the mimicry and imitation of others, he eventually found his own voice. He found himself within the styles that he was trying to emulate. And that's got to be the story for so many authors, right? Very difficult thing to do as well. Yeah, I certainly haven't found mine yet. It's I've wanted to. And I know what I have to do if I'm ever going to find it, which, I mean, sadly, I don't think that's a guarantee that you'll find your voice, even if you try as you may, right? Or perhaps your voice is just simply not distinct enough to set you apart from the hordes of others out there that you are now competing with. But of course, I think all of us know what it takes to actually find and develop your own voice, which is just a lot of rote repetition and work. A lot of work, unpaid work. A lot of attempts at trying, and that's going to be what separates the wheat from the chaff, ultimately. Do you put in the hours of toil and labor to attempt to hear the voice that is distinctly your own amidst the throng of wails and screams out there for attention? Don't know. That's the challenge you have as a writer. And if you try and take a shortcut and you know it deep down that it's not ready, everybody will know. Everybody will know. Trust me. So, good luck. And I mean that. That is not an enviable journey. That is a very hard thing to do. Miller, however, did it. And succeeded, but God, I mean, it took, you read the book, you're like, are we envious of him? Broke at like 39 or something like that. I forget his exact age in the book, but it's like something like that, It's like, it's approaching middle age and broke in a foreign country. Wife back in the States, never arriving. And, an adventure, certainly, but you want to talk about chaos and instability. I mean, literal starvation and hunger. It's not a joke, right? So, nevertheless, and this is perhaps the real lesson of the book, if we were to take one or distill it down to one. What Miller teaches us, one of the many things that Miller teaches us. You don't need money to create outstanding art. In fact, instead, what you need may in fact be hunger. Physical, literary, sexual, true hunger, a drive, a deep itch to scratch. There are so many, I think the word motivation might be up there with my most hated words in the English language, along with passion. Those two words need to be annihilated, eradicated, forgotten by every mind walking the globe. Real motivation You know what I mean? Yeah. You can give yourself real motivation. It's hard to be hungry when your plate is full, was a comment on something, I forget where it was long ago. It's hard to be hungry when your plate is full. But that's perfect. I mean, it was precisely, accurately summed up. In spite of how bad it got, you know, the starvation, the desperation, he claims it was great. The hunger completely shaped him, apparently. Who knows? I mean, that could just be the glee of surviving such a dire situation, but it seems authentic. As he said, after accepting the hopeless situation that he found himself in, he discovered Paris and the French spirit. Being at the lowest rung, having absolutely no resources, was, in his own words, the best thing that ever happened to him. "You're so thoroughly alive," he said. "You're living then with your instincts like an animal." Joy is what Miller communicates in this book. Joy against all odds and freedom. He lived, joyfully lived, without and against hope. As he put it, "Il ne faut jamais désespérer," which is why I try to din into Carl and Van Norden every night. A world without hope, but no despair. Which I love, you know. Hopeless, yet joyful. Now that is feet on the ground, my friend. Very Buddhist, actually. Miller writes with the most joyfully cynical optimism I've ever encountered. In the midst of chaos, he's got a big shit-eating grin on his face, rolling with the punches and waiting to see what happens. Forward, as he puts it, right? So yeah, this is the story of a man on an adventure, right? A man approaching middle age, mind you. It's not in any way a Bildungsroman. This is more of a life starts at 40 novel, and man is it debaucherous. So yeah, he leaves his wife June back in New York, and he's waiting for her, but she's never on the boat when it arrives. So they have this kind of marriage in limbo, right? But no matter how arrogant, how licentious, how much of a nihilistic prick he becomes, he's never able to hide the fact that deep down he's a moral guy at heart. A kind of showman who wants to be a tough guy, right? And, you know, probably was a tough guy, you know, coming from Brooklyn, but really just loves life and literature and people of all varieties. Henry Miller is like your university dropout, long lost, forever bachelor, dirty uncle who's been all over the world and who pops in from time to time to give you some marvelous gift and regale you with all sorts of stories of his travels and tall tales, and, you know, he's a bullshitter, right? Henry Miller is a bullshit artist who's very concerned with telling the truth. He's a total contradiction, and I think he'd probably be the first to say so. I think he's called himself that before. Perry Meisel, professor at New York University, wrote that even before the first publication of Tropic of Cancer in France in 1934, in parentheses its notorious obscenity kept it illegal in the United States until 1961, Miller had also perfected one tradition of Bohemian mythology that made poverty and exile guarantees of professional integrity. Which is probably, you know, yeah. Right, yeah. That's the first thing. I mean, the novel just starts right away with him painting the picture for you of where he's at in Paris with no money, down and out, and horny as hell. One famous passage which many of you may know, printed on the outside of this book, actually. This is on page 1, when we first get to know, which, I mean, the way it starts is unforgettable. "I am living at the Villa Borghese. There's not a crumb of dirt anywhere, nor a chair misplaced. We are all alone here, and we are dead. Last night Boris discovered that he was lousy. I had to shave his armpits, and even then the itching did not stop. How can one get lousy in a beautiful place like this? But no matter. We might never have known each other so intimately, Boris and I, had it not been for the lice. Boris has just given me a summary of his views. He is a weather prophet. The weather will continue bad, he says. There will be more calamities, more death, more despair. Not the slightest indication of a change anywhere. The cancer of time is eating us away. Our heroes have killed themselves or are killing themselves. The hero then is not time, but timelessness. We must get in step, a lockstep, toward the prison of death. There is no escape. The weather will not change. It is now the fall of my second year in Paris. I was sent here for a reason I have not yet been able to fathom. I have no money, no resources, no hopes. I am the happiest man alive." Tremendous beginning to that book. It's a very interesting condition we find Mr. Miller in. Stylistically, Miller was doing something abrasively different for the time. Pioneering, definitely. He was writing about life in a direct way that was immediate, fervent, edgy, unapologetic, dirty, erotic, and exciting to read. Even while being grotesque, being base and pretty just like gross, right? But the writing was good. The subject matter was gross, but the writing was actually good, right? But you'll be reading and you'll just be like, oh, Jesus Christ, I can't believe he did that. What happens next? You know, that kind of thing. Often it's just a catastrophe. And while he talked mad shit about New York and America, you can take Miller out of America, but you cannot take the America out of Miller. No way. No way. It's in his blood. Try as he may to be Céline or Rimbaud or Dostoevsky, he still carries his wholesome New Yorker sentimentality. He reeks of it wherever he lays his hat. Yeah, Tropic of Cancer was banned in the States until '61. His U.S. publisher, Grove Press, actually went on trial for obscenity and won in 1964. You know, when they decided that it wasn't a work of pornography or obscenity. It actually had literary merit, right? And that was a big damn deal because that broke down the door for all sorts of transgressive fiction, right? Which is great. I mean, and that's where we're at today. You know, we have a lot of freedom of speech, which is wonderful. And we need to keep it that way. And it kind of it launched Henry Miller into the heights of fame, basically. This isn't to say that people had not or weren't already reading his stuff. They were, but, you know, he got famous because of, you know, the scandal, right? Earlier, one guy named Jacob Brussel, who had been selling bootleg copies of The Tropic of Cancer that were printed, I think, in Mexico, was sentenced to 3 years in jail. So, I mean, for printing a book, right? I mean, it's kind of wild. And it's nothing, you know, it's nothing as scandalous as Sade or Bataille, or even Genet, really, but yet it caused a great hullabaloo for many years. So Miller's wife, in real life, June, Mona in the book, bought his ticket to Europe, you know, bought his ticket to France, bought his ticket to Paris. And then Anais Nin, Miller's friend and wonderful author in her own right, supported Miller financially while he was writing this book, with funds borrowed from Otto Rank, the colleague of Sigmund Freud. So all these connections are very interesting, right? This time in Paris. It's funny because Miller was also at least partially funded by an admirer of his wife June back in New York for one of his other books that he'd written earlier, I believe, which June claimed she was writing so the admirer would give them money. So there's a pattern here, right? Miller's like a literary pimp. Go get Daddy some cash to write his smut. That's a cigar. Miller actually did write some smut under a pseudonym for cash at one point. I'm not sure exactly when. For $1 a page. Good money at the time, from the sounds of it. Of course, the liabilities were far greater at the time. You could actually be, as I just spoke about, this was a time when you could actually be thrown into jail for writing books or publishing material. One kind friend and patron actually sent me Under the Roofs of Paris, I think the title that was used when it came out was Opus Pistorum, which I still have yet to read, but thank you very much. I warn you though, if anybody actually goes and looks into that, it's filled with all the depraved filias one can imagine. I looked at the Amazon reviews, and it looks to be like much more in the tradition of Sade than the others. So, reader be warned. I also think it's probably not his best work, right? Because, I mean, it's smut. So if you're on the fence about trying Miller out or getting into his work, I would stick with the majors, right? I would stick with, like, Tropic of Cancer, Capricorn, Black Spring, maybe Sexus, Nexus, or Plexus. The Rosy Crucifixion trilogy, is that I think that's what those are. Yeah. I'll tell you what's interesting. Back in Paris in the 30s, Henry Miller was actually the assistant editor at the Black Sun Press, run by Caress and Harry Crosby. And Harry was a poet and friend of Hemingway and the godson of J.P. Morgan, and would eventually kill himself in New York with his lover, infamously committed suicide. Also a friend of Hart Crane, whose poetry I'm going to review very soon. So Miller was kicking around that circle of individuals, and that actually wasn't mentioned in the review of the book Black Sun by Geoffrey Wolff, which is an amazing, probably the best biography I've ever read in my entire life, a biography of Harry Crosby. I reviewed it for patrons only, link below. But yeah, it wasn't mentioned in there for some reason, which is strange, but it was mentioned in an interview with Caress that I found on YouTube, which I've linked below as well, which was cool. So yeah, all these overlapping circles, you know. We get a lot of stories, but, you know, it makes me think that what didn't get put into writing must have been way more interesting. Also, the thing with Otto Rank was curious, I thought, because Tropic of Cancer is kind of a psychoanalytic novel, in a way. Or at least there are psychoanalytic themes within it. Kind of like introspective, you know, associative, free associative, like stream of consciousness moments, a lot of strange metaphor. It's a kind of hallucinatory sometimes. It'll just go off. It's a memoir, but it's also experimental memoir, right? People call Miller a misogynist or a sexist. They do. It seems to me, personally, the truth is, tough guy shtick or not, women loved him, and he loved women. I'm not going to tell you what to think. You make up your own mind. But for me, he's a fascinating character and a fine writer. Miller's writing is virtually plotless, except for the basic narrative of the expatriate moving from, you know, meal to meal, drink to drink, body to body, job to job. Swan's reference. Heads up for the sensitive, but chances are, if you're reading Miller, you're not expecting manners. And if you're a fan of the show, chances are you've got a thicker skin than the average reader. I'll show you something thick. Turkey sandwiches. Miller writes about women the same way he writes about cities, with reverence or disdain. My wife made this observation about women being places, or represented as such in art or music. When we were driving across the border of Georgia recently, and Georgia on my mind was referenced in the sign, welcome to Georgia. Georgia could be a place or a woman or both. And woman is a place. Woman is the place that we all come from, right? That's kind of what Miller treats women as in his writing. Beautiful places he's experienced or inhabited. Like the city of Paris. Mother Earth, motherland, right? Polya talks about this a great deal in Sexual Personae. No agape without eros, as Polya says, and as Miller says, no passion without an erection. Or his friend, rather. I think it may have been the salacious scumbag character Carl in the book. Sleazy, but insightful. That's actually an interesting type. Like that's a conversation he's having with this woman who is like the only female friend that Carl has had because she refuses to sleep with him. She refuses to just be, you know, a lay. And this drives Carl nuts, but he kind of bonds with her over it, interestingly. He's trying to seduce her this entire time, but they've like become buds, right? Which is very interesting, you know? I don't think Miller thought that being friends with women was, I don't think he thought that was an impossibility at all. I think he probably had Henry Miller had a lot of friends and acquaintances in general. He really liked people. He really, really liked people. He made friends very easily, it seems. And that's also, you know, it was also a very useful survival mechanism in Paris. And that was cool, you know. And interestingly enough, Polya almost certainly read Henry Miller because the word Thonian pops up in Tropic of Cancer. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I feel like I have not seen that word utilized anywhere else except in Sexual Personae, which of course I'm reading right now. In this series on Patreon, and you can sign up, link below, if you want to join us. Chapters 2 and 3, the video for that, the review for that will be coming out the 30th or thereabouts. But yeah, authenticity is the important thing for Miller. That comes across. He writes to find out who he is. His books are an embodiment of him. I'm paraphrasing, he said something like that. For better or worse, or both at the same time. He wears catastrophe lightly in the book. He doesn't let anything get... The thing for him is to not take things too seriously. He's mostly about having a good meal and a good time and a good romp in the sack. Miller is someone who waits. He waits patiently, you know? He doesn't take action or insist on anything per se. He kind of projects this grab life by the balls modus operandi, right? This lust for life exuberance. But actually he's sort of an opportunist, and he even calls himself a hyena in the book, which is appropriate. He waits for something to show him the way. He's a scavenger, right? He's after carrion. But when he finds the scent, he goes for it. But yeah, it's interesting, you know, his comparison of himself to a hyena in the book, scouring the streets for the next meal. That's accurate, right? That was his situation. Him and his other gang of hyena friends, living from day to day and moment to moment. I mean, it was really immediate. And anybody with criticisms of that, I don't think has ever been put in that situation. Because that is I mean, look, like my wife said, this was before factory farming, you know. Your main priority at that point is food, you know, and then everything else that comes with it, right? Sex. People want to just write it off as like, you know, philandering and drinking and smoking. No, this is about like the experience of being a hungry man. Hungry in every sense of the word. It's real shit in there, I'm telling you. I love reading Tropic of Cancer because you never know where he's going to go next. What trouble he'll get into, what insights he'll have. You'll laugh out loud and then sometimes be floored by a line that seemingly comes from out of nowhere. The book is very alive, remarkably vivacious, for being written damn near 100 years ago, right? When I first read it when I was like 16, I thought it was complex and deep and mysteriously meandering. It didn't really make any sense. The structure didn't make any sense to me. It still doesn't. But I get it now. Now I realize, it's a diary. It's a bunch of scummy goofball characters and their domestic dramas, whores and drinks and thoughts and mishaps, escapes to the brothel, followed by nostalgic, homesick, quasi-philosophical, dirty old man musings. Which is great for a book. And it's cool. Like, Miller's cool, right? I mean, it's fun. It's like, he's enthused about life. There's a lot of enthusiasm for just like the basic things, I think one of the strangest lines from the book when I was 16 was the one where he's talking about walking around Paris, looking at all the statues and getting an erection while starving. And I was just like, that is the strangest combination of things. Wandering around with an erection, looking at these statues in Paris while starving. It's just, I don't know, for some reason that stuck with me. I was just like, I remember that. I was like, maybe that was the first time while reading the book then that I was just like it was sort of like, wow, I'm reading something different. I'm reading the story of a strange man. So it's just funny what you remember, His manner of writing is educated, but his subject matter is always mired in squalor. So that contrast, that dynamic, plus a huge heaping portion of good humor and not being afraid to die. Voila. Henry Miller. Which is perfect. That's what makes him so enjoyable to read, right? You're reading an intelligent author with a great sense of humor, an undying sense of humor, really, writing about disgusting stupidity or depravity, whether amongst his friends, himself, or the nation he inhabits or came from. Miller loved Rimbaud, Baudelaire, Le Poète Maudit, and especially, if I'm remembering correctly, Blaise Cendrars, and the infamous Louis Ferdinand Céline, whom Roberto Bolaño, in all seriousness it seems, called an abject human being while praising his talent. When I first read The Tropic of Cancer by Miller when I was 16 or 17, I didn't understand what I was reading at all. I went from Sade to Miller. Now, after reading it again, first I was surprised by how much I remembered from the book. But also, what I never realized was how much it shaped me, right? How much I actually understood when I first read it. It sounds so modern, so colloquial, even by today's standards. The crass American Brooklyn voice just never changes much. It's a classic tale. It's just immediately accessible in a way that I'm not sure. I don't think even Hemingway is that accessible. And I mean, The Sun Also Rises it was published just a few years before this one. I'm pretty sure. Let's see. The Sun Also Rises. 27 or something like that? 26, yeah. Okay, so it was 26. So this was published in 31. 5 years. 5 years before this. So, not even Hemingway sounds kind of, not stuffy, but a little more refined, right? Even though Hemingway is very stripped down. But this is very, very accessible. Except it's surreal. So it's also it's kind of odd. It's not accessible in that manner. It's accessible language-wise, conversationally, but it's not accessible in the traditional narrative novel way. Like, it's not a recognizable 3-act structure. It's meandering. That's really the best word to use for Miller. Miller is a meandering flaneur or something, whatever you want to call him. He's going all over the place. He's going into his own head, and he's talking about what's going on outside of him, and he's all over the place, literally. Starving in Paris, wild-eyed, looking for food and women to eat. This is Miller's sustenance. The whole book is an account of sumptuous meals and dirty trysts. A catalog, a diary, a colorful, poetic inventory. He likes cataloging things and making inventories. He likes, I think Miller likes lists. In fact, I picked up this old book at an estate sale called The Books in My Life by Henry Miller, which is just a book about his favorite books, which is great. And he even, near the end, he has a section of his to-be-read list. The 100 books which influenced me most. Oh yeah, that's great. Hamsun, Lao Tzu, James Joyce, Huysmans, Petronius, Whitman, Thoreau, Balzac, Céline, Cendrars, Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, Conrad. Tons of great stuff in here. Man, Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights. Yeah, I got to reread that one, buddy. Man, that is a great book. Tennyson, Rimbaud, Rabelais, Proust. Oh yeah, it's great. Hesse, yeah, Siddhartha is on there. Good deal. Yeah, it's just great, you know. Books are composed of books. What was it? Something that Cormac McCarthy said? Yeah. Nobody writes with the zeal and vivacity of Miller. He writes of the dirty, happy joy of sex, right? The frolicking, romping silliness and dirtiness with laughter and zeal. This is so different from the work, for example, of Georges Bataille, the other of the three men who most formed my vision of the spectrum of eroticism in literature. And actually, there's a fourth, which would be Ballard. Bataille combines eroticism not only with death, but horror. Joy and horror, right? Miller, not so much. Not at all. Yet there is, in Bataille, nevertheless, exuberance. But less joy and more like the total annihilation of individual identity in ecstasy. Apocalyptic ecstasy. That's not Miller. Miller is way different. Miller is all about having a good time, with bits of warm sentimentality. The good old American in him. But he's still sharp, right? But he doesn't descend to the depths that Bataille does. He's also not as deep a thinker. But it's very interesting to compare the work of Georges Bataille and Henry Miller. Bataille was aware of and actually wrote a paper defending Henry Miller. But Miller was not aware of Bataille, which is surprising. Both were writing in France in the late 20s, early 30s. Both had scandalous, obscure clandestine books printed. Both of their works would certainly be considered obscene for the day. Both of their novels were certainly surreal or existential. These would be The Tropic of Cancer and Bataille's Story of the Eye. Both attempted suicide. Both had family members who were mentally ill. And both were highly concerned with explicit sexuality and eroticism in their writings. Portions of The Tropic of Cancer reminded me of the work of Georges Bataille. For example, when Miller's gazing at the prostitutes, what have you, he depicts this as confronting the void, basically. The origins of man, something religious, but terrifying. It's very similar to the scene in Bataille's Madame Edwarda, when she pulls up her dress and exposes herself to the protagonist and says, Je suis Dieu. I am God. This is the moment in Miller. It's on page 199, I think, of this edition. The girls have undressed and we are examining the floor to make sure that they won't get any splinters in their ass. They are still wearing their high-heeled shoes. But the ass is worn down, scraped, sandpapered, smooth, hard, bright as a billiard ball or the skull of a leper. On the wall is Mona's picture. She is facing northeast on a line with Krakow written in green ink. To the left of her is the Dordogne, encircled with a red pencil. Suddenly I see a hairy crack in front of me set in a bright, polished billiard ball. The legs are holding me like a pair of scissors. A glance at that dark, unstitched wound and a deep fissure in my brain opens up. All the images and memories that have been laboriously or absent-mindedly assorted, labeled, documented, filed, sealed, and stamped break forth pell-mell like ants pouring out of a crack in the sidewalk. The world ceases to revolve. Time stops. The very nexus of my dreams is broken and dissolved, and my guts spill out in a grand schizophrenic rush, an evacuation that leaves me face to face with the absolute. I see again the great sprawling mothers of Picasso, their breasts covered with spiders, their legend hidden deep in the labyrinth, and Molly Bloom lying on a dirty mattress for eternity. On the toilet door, red chalk cocks and the Madonna uttering the diapason of woe. I hear a wild, hysterical laugh, a room full of lockjaw, and the body that was black glows like phosphorus. Wild, utterly uncontrollable laughter, and that crack laughing at me too, laughing through the mossy whiskers, a laugh that creases the bright, polished surface of the billiard ball. Great whore and mother of man with gin in her veins. Mother of all harlots, spider rolling us in your logarithmic grave, insatiable one, fiend whose laughter rives me. I look down into that sunken crater, world lost and without traces, and I hear the bells chiming. Two nuns at the Palace Stanislas and the smell of rancid butter under their dresses. Manifesto never printed because it was raining. War fought to further the cause of plastic surgery. The Prince of Wales flying around the world decorating the graves of unknown heroes. Every bat flying out of the belfry a lost cause. Every hoopla a groan over the radio from the private trenches of the damned. Out of that dark, unstitched wound, that sink of abominations, that cradle of black-thronged cities where the music of ideas is drowned in cold fat, out of strangled utopias is born a clown, a being divided between beauty and ugliness, between light and chaos, a clown who, when he looks down and sidelong, is Satan himself, and when he looks upward, sees a buttered angel, a snail with wings. When I look down into that crack, I see an equation sign, the world at balance, a world reduced to zero and no trace of remainder. Not the zero on which Van Norden turned his flashlight, not the empty crack of the prematurely disillusioned man, but an Arabian zero, rather. The sign from which spring endless mathematical worlds, the fulcrum which balances the stars and the light dreams and the machines lighter than air and the lightweight limbs and the explosives that produce them. Into that crack I would like to penetrate up to the eyes, make them waggle ferociously, dear, crazy metallurgical eyes. When the eyes waggle, then I will hear again Dostoevsky's words, hear them rolling on page after page, with minutest observation, with maddest introspection, with all the undertones of misery now lightly, humorously touched, now swelling like an organ note until the heart bursts and there is nothing left but a blinding, scorching light, the radiant light that carries off the fecundating seeds of the stars, the story of art whose roots lie in massacre. When I look down into this fucked out cunt of a whore, I feel the whole world beneath me, a world tottering and crumbling, a world used up and polished like a leper's skull. If there were a man who dared to say all that he thought of this world, there would not be left him a square foot of ground to stand on. When a man appears, the world bears down on him and breaks his back. There are always too many rotten pillars left standing, too much festering humanity for man to bloom. The superstructure is a lie, and the foundation is a huge quaking fear. If at intervals of centuries there does appear a man with a desperate, hungry look in his eye, a man who would turn the world upside down in order to create a new race, the love that he brings to the world is turned to bile, and he becomes a scourge. If now and then we encounter pages that explode, pages that wound and sear, that wring groans and tears and curses, know that they come from a man with his back up, a man whose only defenses left are his words, and his words are always stronger than the lying, crushing weight of the world, stronger than all the racks and wheels which the cowardly invent to crush out the miracle of personality. If any man ever dared to translate all that is in his heart, to put down what is really his experience, what is truly his truth, I think then the world would go to smash, that it would be blown to smithereens, and no God, no accident, no will could ever again assemble the pieces, the atoms, the indestructible elements that have gone to make up the world. So yeah, it rambles. But you can see the appeal. Miller was not a particularly dangerous author. Scandalous, sure, kind of like crass, but not dangerous. Bataille was absolutely a dangerous author, for sure. And I mean that in several ways. Bataille is certainly the intellectual heavy hitter between the two. Comparing them, in my opinion, reveals Miller's shortcomings as a thinker, but it could also reveal Bataille's shortcomings as an author of fiction. He had some good ones. You know, he did Story of the Eye, and then Madame Edwarda, and My Mother, and The Dead Man. I think I prefer Miller's fiction to Bataille's fiction, typically. But Miller doesn't seem quite as intelligent as Bataille. Miller was an entertainer. Bataille was a true philosopher, and a truly dark human being. Miller could be thrown into pits of despair, but those were shallow streams compared to what Bataille inhabited. And Miller was not, to the best of my knowledge, influenced by Sade. Bataille certainly was, heavily. It's as if Miller thought life were ultimately ecstatic and good, right? Whereas Bataille ultimately thought life was ecstatic and horrifying. As if presented with the void, Henry Miller ultimately laughs, cheerfully. Bataille laughs too, but his is the laughter of a madman, of the insane, right? But he's still laughing. My suggestion for those of you new to Miller would be that you approach Miller the way you would go to a dirty burlesque show, a dirty circus. If you're not prepared to be lightly insulted and get a pie in the face, no matter who you are, don't go, stay home. Meanwhile, we'll be laughing at him and ourselves all night long without you. Better than food. Check it out. One of my all-time favorites. So what did I dislike? Well, Miller can ramble, right? It's a bit bloated, and he regrets this, I think. I think I heard him say that in the documentary I'll link below. There's tons of great stuff, but there's some fluff. There's definitely some fluff. And he never went quite as deep as he was capable of, I think, and he knew it. He probably knew it. He never quite risked it all in his work, although it seems like he risked plenty for the time. Maybe he did the best he could, you know? Who knows? Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching the show. I take the names of all the patrons on Patreon and I place them in this jar, and for every review, I pull out a name, and whoever's name is pulled out is sent a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. Currently it's from Nicaragua. If you'd like to get in on that and help support the show, you can click on the link below and donate whatever you can afford. And I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you. And international shipping is included. You'll also get access to the Sexual Personae series, where I am reviewing, for patrons only, every single chapter of Camille Paglia's Sexual Personae, in a series of 12 videos with supplementary live streams. The first chapter is public, but all the other reviews will be patron only. And it's still very early if you're interested. It's going to go for the rest of the year and into 2025, so come on aboard if you want to do a deep dive. So yeah, if you're a patron, you'll get access to the Discord channels, the patron only reviews, plus a Better Than Friday newsletter. which I send out every Friday, and is just a list of 5 different things that I'm interested in at any given time. If you're looking for new books, films, or music and you think we have similar taste, I think you'll really enjoy that. And there are literally hundreds of them to go through, so check it out. Thanks a bunch to all my patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Sam H. Thank you very much, Sam. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive The Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you love both as much as I. Cheers. Please subscribe if you have not already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, bring a book wherever you go. All right, take care of yourselves. Have a great night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.